right, with our first essential question, we've been looking at the role of the citizen, and one of your most important roles in our government is voting. Voting is our most important responsibility. It gives us the voice in government and allows us to pick the leaders who rule our country. If it's such an important responsibility, then why don't more people do it? What we have here are some statistics from the January 2013 U.S. Census Bureau. And the population of the United States in July of 2012 was a little over 311 million people. Now, voting in our country, you can't vote until you're 18 years old, so we take away the 18-year age population and under of 82.8 million people, and we get a 2012 U.S. voting population of 228,751,000 people in the United States. Now, understand that this number is skewed. It doesn't include the number of people who are not allowed to vote because of felony convictions. But close enough for us, about 228.75 million people could vote in the United States if they wanted to. Now, the statistics below are from January of 2013 from a website that counts election statistics. And in the 2012 election, Barack Obama got 62.6 million votes. Mitt Romney got 59.1 million votes, which when you add those together, you get 121,745,725 votes. When you do the math here, with the number of votes divided by our population, you can see that a little bit more than 53% of our population voted in the 2012 presidential election. This seems low for an important responsibility where the people have the power in our government, and this gives us our voice. Why are only 53% of the people voting? And is there anything we can do about it? So what our question is going to be today and what videos we're going to watch are, should we make voting mandatory in our country? And there's the question. Should voting be mandatory in the United States? What we're going to see here first is a short video that just gives us the definition of mandatory voting and the term for it. And then we're going to look at some videos that go into different viewpoints of mandatory voting, a case that is being brought up in another country right now on mandatory voting, and then we'll use that to answer an online discussion question on Edmodo. Here's our first video. It gives the definition of compulsory voting. It also includes a map in the background where you can see the countries that allow compulsory voting today.
Compulsory voting.
Compulsory voting is a system in which electors are obliged to vote in elections or attend a polling place on voting day. If an eligible voter does not attend a polling place, he or she may be subject to punitive measures such as fines or community service.
Now, in the definition there for compulsory voting, you heard that you could face a fine or community service for not voting or attending a polling place. In many of these countries, you are not fined or given community service for not voting. You just have to show up. You have to put in the effort to show that you don't want to vote. Sometimes a way to voice your displeasure with a country is just simply by not voting. To give people that right, you can still not vote in many of these countries, but you have to at least show up at the polling place. Doing so shows that you had a voice, and your voice was to say nothing. In our country, with that 53% of the vote, some of those people probably do just want to remain silent to show their displeasure. But many do that. Many do not vote simply because a lack of effort, a lack of understanding of the candidates, and then some of it is due also to circumstances like weather, disability, situations like that. But what compulsory voting would do is, if you show up, you've served your country as a citizen. If you do not, you would face a small fine or community service. Jail time is not usually an option with compulsory voting. What we're going to see next now is a video from a talk show where they are debating should we have compulsory voting in the United States. 3 of the 4 people are in favor of it. The very last speaker is against. This video here is more of our why compulsory voting would be good in the United States. Here's the video now on compulsory voting from a show called The Cycle on MSNBC.
The group.
I think that we should all be required to vote. I think it would be a more representative democracy if people actually had to go to the polls and vote. You would see less of an influence of money in politics because a lot of that money is spent, frankly, suppressing the vote. So, Steve, what do you think of my idea?
I do think it's a good idea with a couple of caveats that I would throw on it. Number one is we say compulsory voting, and it's not actually voting that I would require people to do. I would require them to show up at the polls, sort of like you're required to show up at the courthouse if you get a summons for jury duty. It's your civic obligation. If you're there, you can cast a blank ballot, whatever you want to do. You don't actually have to vote for any particular candidate. I also don't think it's the kind of thing that you have to enforce with, like, you're going to jail if you don't vote.
No,
Australia has mandatory voting, nominal fines. They get 94 to 96% participation. I think the biggest benefit of doing this is, think about our politics right now. Think of how much emphasis is placed on demographic groups, targeted turnout, sometimes the ugly side of that, suppressing the vote. We don't want this group coming out. We want our people coming out. If neither party had to deal with that, I think we might have a different election.
I totally agree. I want to see voting mandatory, and I would go even further. I want to see voting day be a holiday so nobody is working. I want to see voting registration be mandatory so when you get your driver's license, say, then you're automatically registered. I think there is a sort of functional disenfranchisement of the poor and the young that comes from taking another whole step to become registered. And look, if you believe in America, if you believe in any nation that's democratic, then you understand you have to participate in that nation and in the process of choosing who governs. And ultimately, it's essential to the function. And if you don't like government, then you're going to say, well, I'm not going to vote because I don't like them and it's always the same guy. That's the reason why you should run to the polls and get involved.
The best part about living in America is that you have the right to be stupid and lazy. And I like having that right.
And you exercise it all the time.
This is absurd. Let me get this straight. You think the very people who are so disengaged politically that they can't bother to vote, these are the people you want running to the polls by force, lest they be charged with a crime.
Do you think that the people...
And so what we got there was just some of the ideas on why compulsory voting should and should not be allowed. One thing you may have heard, they said in Australia, 94% of the people vote and they have compulsory voting there. In our country, we said it was 53%. And one of the things they mentioned there, I just want to point out, most of it hopefully you're getting on your own through notes, but one of the things I wanted to point out is they said a lot of people don't vote because that's what the candidates want. With negative commercials, negative politics, they try to keep certain groups from voting because they think that will help their candidate. Through compulsory voting, everyone would be required to vote, and you would get much more representative percentage of what America truly is. The next video here is going to be a video that is more of the why compulsory voting is negative, why it should not be used in our country. It's a little longer video, but it gives some good ideas for the negative side of compulsory voting.
Many people believe low voter turnout is a problem. As a solution, some advocate mandatory voting. There are mandatory voting laws in other countries, like Australia, which require citizens to vote or face a fine or punishment. Are these laws a good idea? I would say no. Here's one reason why. For over 50 years, political scientists have continually found that most citizens are badly informed. For instance, most cannot identify incumbents. If things are going well, they don't know whom to thank. If things are going badly, they don't know whom to blame. Yet, ignorance isn't even the main problem. Citizens appear to make systematic mistakes about the most basic issues in economics, political science, and sociology. While you can force someone to vote, you can't force them to know a lot about an issue. A typical citizen would fail Econ 101. Do we really want to force him or her to make a choice about economic policy? The typical citizen systematically overestimates the benefits of war and underestimates the human and material costs. Do we really want to force him or her to choose between the hawkish and dovish candidates? When political scientists and economists study political knowledge, they find that the citizens who abstain from voting are typically even more ignorant or misinformed than the citizens who do vote. If we force everyone to vote, the net result is that we get a more misinformed pool of voters. We would then get political candidates who reflect voters' misperceptions. We then get bad public policy. That's not likely to be the electorate's advantage or to the advantage of the most vulnerable members of society. A common objection to my argument is that voter turnout isn't uniformly low among all groups. The disadvantaged, poor, unemployed, and uneducated are much less likely to vote than the advantaged, rich, employed, and educated. So, the argument is that maybe we should force the disadvantaged to vote in order to make sure that the better off don't take advantage of them or ignore their interests. But this objection relies upon a false assumption. It assumes people vote primarily for their self-interest. Now, you're going to find this hard to believe, but when political scientists study voting behavior, they find over and over again that people do not vote selfishly. Political scientists themselves have had a hard time accepting this, and that's why they've done so many studies. Instead, they find that voters tend to vote for what they believe to be the national interest. So we don't need to worry about protecting non-voters from selfish voters. People mean well. They don't want to exploit their neighbors. What we should worry about instead is that people do not invest the time to learn which policies really serve the common good. Forcing people to vote doesn't fix this problem. Elections are high stakes. If we make bad decisions at the voting booth, we contribute to bad government, needless wars, homophobic, sexist, and racist legislation, lost prosperity, and more. All citizens should have an equal right to vote, but if someone wants to abstain from voting because he doesn't feel he knows the right answers, or for any other reason, he should be allowed to do so. You can force people to cast votes, but you can't force them to cast smart, well-informed votes, however good their intentions may be. Mandatory voting guarantees high turnout, but not better government.
All right. So there was the more negative view of compulsory voting. What we're going to do here now last is we have a clip from an Australian morning show where they're going to talk about someone who is suing the government to not have to vote. They don't think it's fair that they were given a $20 fine because they did not vote. What we're going to do, watch this clip. When it's over, you can use your notes taken from these videos. Hopefully you have some good ones on both why compulsory voting is good and bad and kind of start getting a viewpoint of your own that we'll use tomorrow in our discussion in class. You can also look at the notes that I gave you today before you left with both reasons for and against compulsory voting. And use all that information after watching this next clip to answer the question on Edmodo, where you should go next, to begin our online discussion on compulsory voting. Hope you've enjoyed these ideas. Hope it's given you something to think about. We'll see what you have to say tonight on Edmodo, and we'll hear what you have to say tomorrow in class about compulsory voting in our class discussion. Here's the last clip.
The Supreme Court challenge is underway against Australia's compulsory voting laws. Adelaide man Anders Holmdahl has launched the legal bid saying he should not be forced to vote. His lawyer, Kevin Borick, says the current system infringes on his free will.
I think the fundamental argument is we say that it's a right and not a duty.
Well, the court is expected to hand down its finding in a couple of weeks, so does he have a case?
And that's the question that you're going to be asked in Edmodo tonight. Does this guy have a case, and how would you vote if you were a member of the Australian judicial system? Do you think compulsory voting is fair, or do you think it is undemocratic? Thanks a lot. See ya.